Hey, this is Scott from Main Oven Craft. I wanted to take some time and go over the use and the winterization of our sink pod assembly. Just go through some of the features as well. Super simple. It's a 3-bay stainless sink plus a single bay hand wash sink. Both of them have hot and cold water. These are 10 by 14 by 10 inches deep on all 4 bays. And it's a very compact unit with a lot of goodies inside, and we can open up the door and take a quick look. See if the door stays open for us. So inside, we have our on-demand propane-fired hot water heater. We have on the right custom stainless 11-gallon gray water tank. And then on the left, we have a 9-gallon custom-made stainless freshwater tank. So the water comes in from the far side, and I'll show you that fill in a second, goes into the freshwater tank until the overflow, which is this hose right here. Can you see that? That hose right there is our overflow / vent line. And when you're filling, you'll know that the tank is full when that line starts bleeding water onto the floor. At that point, you can shut the water off, and you know you have a full 9 gallons. It's super important every time you go to fill that you've actually gone ahead and drained the gray water tank completely so that you have that entire capacity available to you for the 9 gallons so that you don't end up in an overflow scenario. That being said, if you end up in an overflow scenario, there is also an overflow pipe for the gray water tank so that the water cannot back up into your sinks. So let's go back and take a look inside a little bit deeper. So we have our freshwater tank on the left, gray water tank on the right. This tube right here is a rinsing tube that there are 2 ports on the far side of the sink pod assembly. The one that's toward the front of the trailer is the fill for the fresh water. The one that's toward the back of the trailer where the black cap is the rinse connection. And that would be used if you were doing a bunch of warewashing and you had food particles that had gotten into that tank and you wanted to mix a little bit of bleach in, put it down into the drains, into the gray water tank, and then go through a rinse process while the drain valve is open. We can walk around to the backside and take a look at that drain valve as well when we're looking at the fill valves. So inside, again, we have our rinse. This is our gray water vent / overflow pipe. This is our fresh water / drain / vent pipe. This is the freshwater fill line here, which you can see is a bigger line, so you get a faster fill. Right here is our 12-volt pump, water pump. And to the front here is our accumulator, which is basically a mini pressure tank to help you keep sort of a stable reality in this environment where the pump runs less often. On the right, this is our P-trap, and this is the drain assembly for all 4 basins. The cool thing about this P-trap is that it's disassemblable, so that if we ever had to take the sink basins out, we can unscrew this here. This is a pivotable pivot design, and see that it can kind of move, which is handy. And so this is like a union fitting essentially. This is the nut, this is the top. This can unscrew and come and disconnect here. And with that disconnected, this whole drain assembly can come up with the sinks. Let's go around to the fill and drain side so we can see that before we get into actual operation. So also included in this assembly is a small motorcycle style 12-volt battery, and then a AC to DC power converter that lives just above it. I'm not sure if you can scoot in with the camera and see those. They're packed in tight against the water heater. There in the bottom is the battery, and then above, which is an upside down boondocker sticker, is the power converter. What's unique about that converter is that not only does it provide you with 12 volts of power when this is plugged in, but it's also a trickle charger for the battery. So anytime you're not using this unit and you have access to power, it's always good practice to leave it plugged in. It's like what we call a battery tender. It's always putting just a little bit of juice into the battery to keep it at peak charge, and then it turns off once the battery has reached its top charge point. So I have my light. I want to point some attention to the on-off switch for the pump that's up here. Can you see that? So the down position on this toggle is off. The up position is on. It's not illuminated, so you just have to remember that. But down is off, up is on. So once we decide we're going to use this for water, we'll need to engage the switch in the on position, which will allow the pump to be used, and it will allow power to go to the pump. Now that it's on, we can take a quick look at the faucet above and confirm that we have water pressure, which we do. So we'll have cold on both of those, and if we have the hot levers on, we'll also have water. But at this point, the hot water heater is not engaged because our propane cylinder is not in use. So a really important tip with making this connection to these tiny little recreational tanks is that this adapter that's in here cannot go on the propane cylinder first, because it's basically an open valve in here, and once you put this onto this tank by itself without being on here first, it's just going to bleed straight propane up into the air, which is not safe and not pleasant. So this adapter always goes on this portion first, which is the regulator, and then the tank gets screwed onto the adapter in that sequence. And there's enough room in here that this can be run with the tank sitting inside, but I always recommend once you move in transit and you're done with the sink unit and you're done at your event, you unscrew this, take it off of the adapter, and you can let it be free in here, but essentially just remove this connection for extra safety, and then again make sure that your on-off switch is in the off position. So the propane's connected, our switch is in the on position. The cool thing about this hot water heater is that it has two adjustment dials. The one on the right is the flow restrictor valve. So if the knob is, and the white is what's important to pay attention to. So all the way to the right is the lowest flow of water. All the way to the left is the highest flow of water. And this is important because these little pumps, they don't put out a ton of pressure. So having this more to the right, indicating that the igniter in particular and the burner can operate at a lower pressure, lower flow, is key. If you have this turned too far to the left, the sensor inside this water heater is looking for a higher flow, higher pressure, which this pump can't produce, and therefore it won't ignite. So we need to be on the right of, let's call it 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, that setting. The setting on the left is your burner intensity / water temperature. So there's a certain flow of water passing through the heat exchanger, and this is your temperature regulator for that water. There's a digital display here that we might be able to see that will actually indicate what the water temperature is while this is running. It's not on yet, and it only goes on once you engage the hot water. So let's go above. There's also a window. There's also a window behind this drain right there. You can see that. Finger. Basically, that is a flame indicator. So if you're in a darker spot when this ignites, not only should you smell propane as the exhaust, which kind of comes out up here and some vents on the back, but you'll have the temperature indicator, and obviously you'll have hot water. If you don't have hot water, typically that temperature indicator won't be working, and it's time to sort of problem solve. But usually having the biggest issue is going to be this flow valve restrictor right here needs to be on the lower end of the spectrum. If it's not that, sometimes you can be out of propane, but as long as water is traveling through, the solutions are pretty simple. So we'll go ahead and close this up and turn on the hot. I heard the igniter kick, and it's getting warm. You can see the steam coming off. And you can obviously adjust that temperature with that left knob with the red indicator. We can look underneath and actually see a digital indicator now, which is showing around 113. It's the LED. It's not showing up perfectly on the camera, but it is right around 115, 117. So you can turn that off. So that was hot. This is cold. Make sure it works in both bays. Definitely hot. Definitely able to pass local health requirements. Really nice to have on board. It's an expensive option slash accessory, but it's also built really well. We built this entire unit in-house. We really feel that those stainless tanks that we make are lifetime grade tanks that won't require maintenance. And it's super convenient, and we've used it on a number of events that we've done over the years, and having that sort of onboard wear washing, hand washing capability is really, really I think it just lends to productivity. You don't have to leave the site, and you can feel really confident that what you're bringing to the table is a clean, professional look. So now that we've covered the sort of basic functionality, I want to take a break and talk about winterization. Do a winterization walkthrough on our sink pot assembly. We're going to go over the main reasons why we need to do this, and that main reason is that any freezing that occurs both on the water input or the drain side can damage components. On the water input side, it can drain the heat exchanger and the hot water heater. It can damage components in the pump. It could damage components in the pressure accumulator, or even on the little input filter module that's ahead of the pump in this lineup. So let's take a quick look. So we have our water heater, we have our accumulator, our pump, and then the filter on the backside. All three of those things are prone to freeze damage if water is not purged from the system prior to a freezing event. The other reality is that this PVC P-trap also holds water, and it will need to be drained in combination with the hot water heater and the pump. So we're going to drain the drains and these pressurized systems as well. All of the systems in here that are on the input side are put together with what we call a push to connect fitting. So I want to go a little bit more into detail on how those work. They're also known in like the Home Depot, Lowe's world as shark bite fittings. Really quickly, this is the fitting that's on the bottom side of the hot water heater. It's tight under there and hard to get to, not impossible, but essentially you wet the tube, push it straight in, and it can't come out. There's an O-ring inside, and then there's a little toothed flange washer that keeps the tube from coming back out. You can get it back out, however, by very evenly putting pressure on this orange flange and then pulling straight back out. If you don't put even pressure, it's hard. You can see that it's kind of pulling away on this side, and it allows for that. So you have to use 2 fingers and then pull straight out. So even pressure on this is key. This is the fitting that's a little bit larger for the 1/2-inch line that exists up near the pump. These are a little bit easier to release. Just like that, and then straight out. So the first thing we would do in winterizing is we would turn on the pump, make sure we have system pressure, and we would have the drain on the gray water tank open or not. But if we're in a place outside where we can have it open, we might as well have it open because we don't want water in there as well. So first step in this purging process is to get the water out that we can get out utilizing the onboard pump. So we make sure the pump is on with our switch here. The battery is low in this assembly right now, so we're not going to go through the full draining, but essentially the pump is on, and then you turn your water on until no more water comes out. Both valves on both faucets on until no more water comes out. It'll start sputtering, 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 and you'll know you're at the end of that process where you've gotten the bulk of the water out of the freshwater tank and into the gray water tank. Once we're to that phase of having pumped all the water out of the freshwater tank, then we can focus on the P-trap and we can focus on the hot water heater. And the first step on the pressure side would be to disconnect this line here, which we'll go ahead and depressurize with the pump off. So we'll wait for that water to stop. Ideally, we've already gotten to this point in a real world scenario where it's been sputtering air and there's no more pressure in the system. So with that valve open and no more pressure, we can disconnect this knowing that we're not going to get hit in the face. So we can push back on that flange, push this tube out. Now, this tube can be used as the connection point / entry point for us to push compressed air through and purge both the remaining cold line and the hot water line. And so we would put our air nozzle on this hose here, and we would open the cold on both faucets, and we would do that until no more water came out. It was just air. Then we would close those valves on the faucets and open the hot water side, which would then, the air going through here would be pushing through the heat exchanger of the hot water heater. And we would do that until there was no more water coming out, just air. Repeat that process for both of them a couple times. Also realizing you don't need to, let's say your air compressor produces over 100 psi of pressure. You don't need to be, nor do you want to be putting that amount of pressure through the hot water heater, and the sensitive components are in there. So just a little bit, enough to make water flow, and keep doing that until there's no more water coming out. Go to the hot, do the same, go back to the cold, do it again, go back to the hot, do it once more, essentially until it's just blowing air. As an additional sort of safe element, you can go down to this T connection and you could disconnect this side and this side, which would allow this hot water heater to gravity drain out of this T without necessarily disconnecting this T. You can go even further and disconnect that 90-degree fitting like this, where it goes into the bottom of the water heater if you want. I personally would go that far if I was doing it, but it really depends on how extreme the freeze is that you're dealing with. Additionally, there's a fitting on the underside of the water tank, and we always send these, the water heater, we send these water heater instructions along with the sink pot assembly. You can't see it here, but you can get a very small screwdriver up in there and you can turn the screwdriver out counterclockwise several turns. That's an additional drain, but it's not typically needed if you're able to purge the bulk of the water out with air. The instructions will offer you that option utilizing that additional drain point, but I don't believe it's necessary. So once all the water has been drained out of the hot water heater, both the cold and hot side, then we can take this cap off the P-trap that's here, and you can put a bowl under here and pick up this remaining water. Beyond that, we want to make sure that the gray water drain is open, that drain valve on the other side with the red handle. As long as that's open and there's no accumulated water in there, you're also fine. I wouldn't sweat it if there's a couple inches of water in there because it has the opportunity to expand up. This is the most important element to make sure the water is out of. And you can just leave these connections off over the course of whether you're storing it over the winter or just that one freeze event. It's also super helpful to, when this hose is off, one more time to turn this water pressure switch back on, the water pump switch back on. And because there's no faucet and no back pressure available because this is disconnected here, the pump will just turn on and it'll express any more remaining water that it has in it out of this zone right here, this last connection. So that's just sort of like one more repeat and repeat just to be sure. And you can leave everything disconnected, and then when you get ready to power it back up for the first time, push it back in until it stops. Same thing down there, and you're good to go. So first, all right, so here we are on the what we call the curb side of the trailer. That's the street or the driver's side. So we're on the curb side, and this is the fill port, which is a standard hose connection. You take, and it's white, somewhat symbolic. Black for dirty, white for clean. This is our freshwater input zone. So that's a hose connection, standard hose connection. Screw that on. Again, fill until the overflow line starts to bleed out onto the ground, and then you know you're full with all 9 gallons. This is only really used as the rinse entry point, and it's rare that you would do it. I think I've never done it on any of the mobiles that we've used as demos, but we put it on there standard with everyone in case somebody wants to be pretty fastidious with their cleaning. This below, once I secure this, is the gray water drain. And there may be some water in there from when we were testing it. So this is closed in the horizontal position. Vertical is open. So there was a good chunk of water in there. As a habit, before we leave any event, we typically, especially if we're in a rural environment on top of grass, we'll just go ahead and drain it before we even transport, to shed some weight and to ensure that it's already done. And you can leave this open, but I recommend you drain it and leave it closed after that so that no critters or rodents make their way up inside. So that's the drain assembly. This is the rinsing port, and this is the freshwater fill port on the sink pod.